Thank you to Ignacio for agreeing to do the webinar with us today. It's always great to have one of DFI's directors and main teaching staff with us. And Ignacio is going to talk about the FinTech Stack and it will give you a better idea of how perhaps we can leverage and work upon things so that we can encourage new people and new players into the DFS space and market. So Ignacio, over to you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Sarah, for organizing and everybody for attending. So yeah, we'll talk about the FinTech stack. The notion of a stack is very common among technology circles, especially internet, not common in financial services. So it's a bit of a new concept. What I want to say up front is that I'm not going to say anything you don't already know. So this is not about revealing some new thing that you think you'll think you should have known earlier. No, there's no new revelation of content here. What the FinTech stack represents is how to wrap together all the things that one needs to bring to the party in order to have an effective digital financial service for customers. In my case, more of an inclusive focus, but really it's more general than that. So the attempt with a FinTech stack is to summarize all that we know that we need to bring together rather than to express any new idea. But I think it's important because I think in digital financial services, too often we take what I would call an incremental approach. Oh, let me worry about the digital rails first, and then eventually I'll worry about the agents. But I'm working one thing at a time. Or now I'll try to sort the agents, and later I'll worry about the products. Oh, and then we'll do digital identity later on. So I see too often many of these schemes fail because they are not as successful as they could be, because they take a very incremental, one step at a time approach. This is today's issue and that's tomorrow's issue. And the reality is that it doesn't work like that because everything needs to come together at the same time. Now, of course, within this stack, you can make choices of the things that you want to excel in. So another use of the FinTech stack is not only what is the combination of capabilities that I need to bring together, but also how do I want to stand out? Which is the layer or layers in which I really want to make a difference are going to be my comparative advantage. In fact, which are the layers that I'm going to deliver myself versus the other layers, which are maybe just as important from a total point of view, but I'm not going to do it myself. For those, I'm going to partner with someone who's going to do it with me, or I'm going to consume a service that someone provides as a supplier. So the FinTech stack allows you to look at where do I want to excel, where do I need help, because it's not possible to do everything right up and down the stack. So I think it's a basis for thinking about ecosystems, because an ecosystem is people who are complementary to you, but you're going to be very comfortable working with partners only if you know that your position is very safe in at least one of the layers. I really bring something to the table that everybody wants and needs, therefore I can count on relying on other people to do the others. And I think when there's lack of collaboration in digital financial services, it's simply because many players are not comfortable that if I rely on someone else to do one thing, then the customer relationship is gone. Then I can be bypassed. So it's all about where do you want to be strong? Where can you rely on others? So with that sort of intro, let me just go through it. I'm going to go through it very fast because the objective is not really to explain every individual element of it, but rather for you to see how the notion of the FinTech stack works. Now, you can come up with your own FinTech stack. I'm not going to claim that mine is the right one, but it's just one depiction. And don't focus and don't worry too much about the ordering, whether you think one should be higher or lower, doesn't really matter. What matters is the full picture. Unfortunately, I cannot click on myself on the slide, so I'm just going to be saying click quite a bit, and that's a signal for Sarah to do her thing. I think she knows what to do on the word click. So click.
Okay, here we go.
So I choose to, start sharing, yeah. Okay, so you want to put that on screen show? Yeah, click. So I choose to start my FinTech stack with a question, not of digitizing money, but rather digitizing me, the customer. Because as I say very often in the classroom, digitizing the notion of $100 is trivially easy. Turning $100 into zeros and ones is very easy. What is difficult is digitizing me, and that's important because what is relevant is that those $100 belong to me. So if I don't have a physical representation, a physical way of proving who I am online, then there's no way that those $100 are going to attach to me. So the first question is digitizing me. Click. And that answers the question of who I am, being able to prove that I am ... I am Ignacio. And then, of course, that brings a lot of questions. Who is issuing that digital identity? Are there multiple competing public IDs, like in the US and UK, where there is no notion of a single national ID because there's voter cards and there's driver's license and passports? Is it a voluntary national ID? In fact, there is a national ID, but it's voluntary, like Sweden and India. Is it a compulsory national ID issued by the states, Spain, Kenya? Or is there nothing except a public standard? And then it's a private issuance. You don't go to a police office to get it issued, in case of Sweden. Next question, click, is how do you use it as a service, this national identity? So many places have a physical card, and you use the national identity because you show your card and people stare at it and decide whether it's you or not. Many places also have a registry, digital registry of those IDs, so I can see the card or I can check some national database. But a database by itself is not that useful if I cannot go to anywhere and prove electronically my ID, because there's no POS terminal or no public acceptance where I can go and say, prove to person X that I'm Ignacio Mas. So for that sort of wide acceptance, generally you go to the cardless world of India and Sweden, where it's all done through the mobile phone. And then, of course, through the mobile phone, anywhere you can cause for your identity to be verified for any third party. Click. And then, of course, in financial services, the next set of questions is, what is that digital identity used for? And then here I mean the legal identity, the base identity. Is it just for account opening, or do you expect people to do it for every transaction? It need not be for every transaction, because you did your KYC, I showed my legal ID, and now from there on, username and password or PIN is good enough. So these are all the questions around this layer of digital identity, proving who I am. Click twice. So the next question, not to be confused with digital identity, is okay, I now can prove that I'm Ignacio Mas, but how do people find me is a separate question. So it's no longer I can authenticate myself as the owner of the account, but if you need to send me money, how will you know me? Click. And so the traditional way is to be given, like represented in this traditional check, a sequence of numbers that represent my account number, and that's how I am known. It's not my identity, but it's how I am known. Money sent to that number will come to my account. Then there's been a lot of innovations, click, to make it much more universal. And that's been the credit card, the 16-digit PAN number, which then becomes a unique international way of being known as a system of 16 digits. Click. In Europe, there's been a lot of effort to unify that I am known as, and that's under SEPA, the IBAN, I-B-A-N, which is a unique numbering system for bank accounts across all of Europe. Click. Then there was an innovation with PayPal, which you don't need to be known by these funky, hard to remember numbers. In fact, you'll just be known as your email address, and in the background, we'll translate the email address into an account number. Click. Then the next innovation was M-Pesa, saying, well, okay, why don't we be much simpler, and where people don't have email addresses, they have phone numbers. So the phone number became your payment address. Click. And the latest innovation in this layer has been UPI in India, where you can choose your name, much like on the web. I can choose my web address or my email address in a flexible way, and then there's in the background that can be linked to me. Like, for example, I can be Ignacio at Punjab National Bank, or a phone number, or whatever I want. I can choose what to be known as. It becomes much more of my personal alias rather than using something that I have as a numbering. This is an area I would say in terms of financial inclusion, people tend to work very much at the digital identity layer, and the payment addressing layer is something that is not really addressed with much in regulatory circles. And India and Europe, I think, are leading in that respect. Click. Then the third layer about digitizing me. Okay, now you got to the point where you can prove who you are. I can let it be known how people can address me, find me if they want to send me money. But I am much more than just a repository of money, because I have all this other information that is maybe necessary or useful from a financial services. And that's the user data aggregation. And that is just demonstrating a track record. So this layer is historical in nature. It's about things, data about me that has been generated based on relationships in the past. Click, for example, mining my mobile phone through an app is used very often now to try to ascertain a little bit about who you are. Click, there might be data that is aggregated from third parties for various purposes. So through linking to your Facebook account, the telco, your history of airtime purchases, bill pay purchases. So again, this is all the historical track record, which comes digitally from partners. Or third, click, I can cause interactions with the customers in order to learn more about them. So I can give them little psychometric tests so that I can then figure out what kind of person you are, or observe how you navigate through my app, and infer whether you're a decisive person or not. But all of that is information then trying to collect beyond what is strictly identifying information. And then, of course, the last layer in terms of digitizing me is to turn all of that into a click, into a future-facing prediction. I will call that here reputation engines. Predicting, scoring, click, and that is, of course, in financial services, used a lot very extensively for, and will be much more so for credit scoring. So this is no longer data about you, this is taking your identity and the data about you to make a prediction about the future. Are you going to repay or are you not going to repay? So these are the 4 layers of digitizing me. We really haven't even begun talking about money yet. So click, the next set of layers are about, okay, now that we've kind of nailed you digitally, what about your money? Click. And here I would like to make a strong distinction between 2 elements, which I think gets a bit confused in our sector, and logically they're very different, but people kind of tend to talk about them at the same time. One is the storage of value, which is digitizing my money in stationary state. You have $100. And the second one is the real-time money transfer, which is moving that money. So the picture here shows this highway is very much the real-time money transfers, the way by which money moves around. And you need to click at the storage of value as the parking lots that where money goes in and out and stays when it's not on the road. And that's the notion of the account. That is very important, because my view is that in digital financial services, we talk about digitizing money, but in fact, we're digitizing payments and not money. The vast majority of digital payments, or what we call digital payments, start and end in cash. So there's no, we digitized for the portion of time the money was moving, but it did not start or end in a stationary state in digital format. Now click twice. And what's difficult about these 2 layers is that they require very different features for the customer. So the top layer, the real-time transfers, which is the payments layer, is a layer that requires flow, money to flow. That was the highway analogy that we went through. Moving money fast, every dollar is like every other dollar, go, 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 fast, 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 one click if possible, and go. Whereas click, for the storage of value, which is money staying digital, staying stationary, you require the opposite, friction. And that's just human nature, that if every dollar is like every other dollar, it just will go away. So in fact, for good storage of value services, what you need is exactly the opposite, where every dollar is most definitely not like every other dollar, because these dollars are this kind of money for these kinds of purposes that came from these sources, and those dollars are this other type of money that came from these sources and are for these other purposes. So all money management, which is the essence of storage of value, is separation of money, and that's friction. And that is the tension, click, that we have in current digital financial platforms, that we tend to favor the flow at the expense of the friction. And that's something that I'm personally very focused on. How do we bring friction back without adding complexity to the customer, so that the money, they can feel like the money is in control when it's in stationary state. And I think that's the main issue with digital accounts, click, because basically we treat digital accounts as a continuous money counter. The number goes up and down like a yo-yo. Well, that's not how we manage our money normally, because we'll put money in jars, either actual physical jars or mental jars, which we call budgets and so on. And it's not one counter, it's a whole bunch of, it's a much more rich set of stories that we tell ourselves about the different types of money. It's not just one counter. So I think if you're not used to using your money in digital, thinking of money in digital format, you look at a money in an account the same way as you would approach a bottomless pit, a well, and you just don't see the bottom. And here your financial education program is telling you, throw money into this well. It's like, yeah, but I don't see the end of it. But throw it. Trust me, it's good for you. No, it's not good for you, because there is no friction in there. There's nothing that can help you feel in control of that of the money, making sure that the money goes for the things that you really want it to go, and not get sidetracked very quickly. The other thing I want to say about this layer, especially the real-time transfers, is what's important for it is interoperability. You want one highway system. That's when it becomes most efficient. Click, and that's represented by this cloud. Click again, by this cloud. That's a digital money cloud. There's one cloud, and money can flow freely within this cloud. That's not the reality in most countries. Click. The reality in most countries, what we call the digital money system, is in fact all these other separate clouds. They're not talking to each other. And so if you want to pay person A, you need to get into this cloud, because I use my Airtel account for these payments, and then I have to use my Tigofest account for this other thing, and my equity bank account for this other thing, and these things don't meet. And I can guarantee you, if being in each of these clouds requires having some accounts, some storage of value, well, I may keep my money in digital format if it works for everything, but I'm not going to keep a little bit of money in each of these clouds. So interoperability is essential at the real money transfers level, which is why the highway system analogy is the right one. And of course, the problem is, compare these mishmash of clouds with Click, the next cloud, the big cloud, which is the cash cloud. The cash cloud really is one big cloud. The bill works for everything. And this mishmash of little digital clouds has no hope of competing with the one big universal cloud. So interoperability again is essential, because cash is highly interoperable. So there's no way you're going to beat cash with non-interoperable or very partial, a mishmash of partial money solutions. Which then of course creates the necessity of Click, the next layer of digitizing my money. So so far we've talked about money that's already in digital format. What about going into the digital cloud from the cash cloud? And that's the cash conversion, the whole story of the agents and so on, the cash merchants, which is essentially creating backward compatibility of the new payment system, which is the digital one, with the old payment system, which is the cash system. So in the same way as you would not think of doing a new version of Windows without interoperability to the old version of Windows, why would you think of doing a digital money system without interoperability with the existing payment system, which is cash? So Click, what we need is all these bridges between the cash cloud and the electronic cloud, and that cannot possibly be agents or ATMs in countries with little banking infrastructure. It's woefully inadequate, and so agents is the scalable solution that we have for that. Click twice. So the next now we have the basics. You've digitized me, and you digitized my money. I can now go from the cash cloud to digital money. I can keep it in stationary format. I can move it around. But that's still very far from what do I do with this? And that's the driving relevance layer. Now here, I have a little bit of a cheeky layer here, because open access interfaces is basically allowing innovators to drive relevance into these systems. Let me make an analogy here, Click, which is electricity systems. The interoperability between electricity grids would be much more at the back end, where electricity company can buy electricity from whatever generator is most efficient for them. But there's something even more remarkable in the electricity network, and that's the icon that I have there, the electric plug. The electric plug is front-end interoperability, not back-end interoperability. It's front-end interoperability in the sense that once I've bought electricity from an electricity supplier, utility company, I can use it for whatever I want, attaching whatever device I want, and the electricity company has no say in what I can and cannot do with their electrons. Within reason, because obviously you can do damage to the electrical circuits, so those devices that become pluggable into the network have to satisfy certain criteria, and so they're type approved. It cannot be any device alike, but pretty much any device that is type approved in a very generic certification process. So that is what allows the electricity company, the electric utility, to focus on delivering cheap, reliable electricity, and without them getting into their heads that they also need to be manufacturing the toasters and the washing machines and the lawnmowers. Imagine if the utility company felt that it had a right to decide what you use the electricity for and to be a single supplier of devices. It just would not work. Well, that's what we're doing in financial services. We're the same company that provides all of the previous layers is also going to provide the applications and the services and stuff like that. I think that's very difficult to drive relevance when the same party that is worrying about uptime of the server and there being enough agents and doing the KYC and so on is also worrying about everything else. So this layer here, open access interfaces, for me is like a breaker of control, that one guy is doing the basics of the digital money services, which is everything below, and other people may then compete for making all this really customer relevant, really customer friendly. So that's what that analogy is. Click. In our world, we call those APIs, or at least open banking APIs. Not all APIs are of this nature, but that's what initiatives Click, like UPI in India and PSD2 in Europe, access to account program in Europe, seek to achieve, where I can have a bank and I choose that bank because I trust them with my money, but I don't need to interact with my bank account with the bank's own application because I don't like it for whatever reason. I want to use a different application to manage my money. But my money is with the bank, is not with the application providers, because all they're doing is a user interface. So I tell my bank what to do with my money, but through the application of a third party. So that would be the analogy there. That's what UPI, open banking platforms in UPI in India and PSD2 try to do in Europe. Separate how I experience my money, how I instruct, issue the instructions from who is the underlying party that is managing my money. And I put it in this layer simply because I see that as eventually a pretty strong requirement for driving relevance for the reasons stated earlier. Someone who's entirely focused on usability of the user interface is more likely to get there than a bank that has to worry about a million other things, all the layers below. Click twice. So on top of that, I want to make a distinction between standard tools, which is the mass customization solutions, and Click, the next layer, which is structured products. In our industry, we tend to jump to products, I think, way too quickly. I think the approach in digital, I would say in pretty much any domain of application of digital, is tools, not products. Let me explain that. Do 2 clicks with reference to these two pictures. The structured products approach is what the beverages companies would do. Okay, you're so special. I understand you so well that your drink is this particular type of Coca-Cola or Fanta or whatever. And the result is this proliferation of products on the shelves. That creates a little bit of a logistical problem, marketing problem, because now I have to support all of these things and I need to make it easy for you to find the right product for you. The tools approach is represented by the hammer. So essentially, with a hammer, is like, I'm not going to tell you what to do with a hammer. All I can tell you is the hammer goes bang, bang. You figure out what you want to bang. Now, of course, through my marketing, I'm going to help you through use cases. Saying, for example, you might want to hang some pictures on your walls, and for that you use a hammer. You might want to build entire houses, and for that you use a hammer. But the focus is on the capability, and you, the customer, supply the need that fulfills. If you think of Facebook, it's all tools and no product. Or to put it differently, it's the same product that we all use. It's the same Facebook that we all use, but we experience it highly differently because I use different tools from you. There's a tool to put up a picture, to put up a message, to like things, to respond to. All of these are inherent tools because by themselves, they don't fulfill any of my needs. But together, I craft my own experience. So that is the tools versus products. And I think in digital financial services, we need to rely a lot more on tools than products because products are hard to market. If you want to be customer centric, you would need 20, 30, 40 different types of bank accounts for different segments that meet their different needs and so on. Whereas the tools, it's the same tools for all of us, except we'll use them slightly differently. And that's how you achieve mass customization. Same tools, leading to different experiences. And I think I'll just leave it. No, sorry. Can you do several clicks? I'll tell you when to stop. Skip this one. Skip. Click. Click again. Click. One more. That's it. That's the last. With this, I'll stop. Which is basically saying, okay, let's not forget that in a digital world, just being relevant is not good enough. We need to drive engagement, and engagement is all about trust. Encourage me to participate and solve my issues. And I think that's something I hope we demonstrate in our DFI courses, where I think we have great content, but it's not great content at all. We have all the tools of engagement through the fun challenges and many other devices, because to make it not just relevant, but also fun and fulfilling in broader ways. And so that is a whole range of interactivity tools, personalization tools, and so on. And of course, up till now, all these layers up till now have been about creating a customer promise, a promise of a service. Then you need to deliver it. You need to fulfill it. And in particular, you need to show to the customer you're there when there are problems. And that's the whole resolution, customer care, customer resolution layer that is very important, because that's ultimately what it's all about: putting up a great promise and fulfilling it and delivering it and helping the customers in good times and bad. So I'll just leave it here. That is a broad view of what I would consider a fairly complete stack. Again, you might change labels, you might break some up, maybe I'm missing a thing or two, maybe you would reorder them. But the point is, this is the range of things that needs to be done as part of digital financial service. Now, don't be thinking that this is what you need to do. This is a range of capabilities that you need to be able to bring together for the benefit of your customers. And you decide which ones you're going to do and control because you are going to do it better than everybody else, which ones you're going to do because the economics is just better if I do it, and which ones are you going to partner because there's really no reason why I should be doing it. I can get a better service cheaper for my customers if I rely on someone else. So let me just stop here. Perhaps we can start a discussion.
Great, thanks very much, Ignacio. That was really interesting so far, and I can see that we've got some questions coming in. So let's have a go at answering a few of them. So we've got one here from Maxime. In the Indian stack, does the payment addressing require a single bank account? Will it be the unique bank account number I will use with any relation with my government during the whole life?
Well, you will have a number associated with each bank account, because part of it is communicate, it's my money, but my money in this particular parking lot, to use the analogy I used earlier. So you would have different, and that's where the system that they've come up with a system very flexible, but the example I showed earlier, I will choose to be Ignacio at Punjab National Bank, at PNB. Then if I open an account at SBI, I will probably say the same thing, Ignacio at SBI. So the first part denoting me, the second one of my accounts pointing at the one that I want to use. So the idea is to keep it very flexible like that, that you can come up with whatever numbering scheme you want to identify your accounts if you want to make life easy for yourself and for other people.
Great, thank you very much, Ignacio. And we've got another question from Fahad. Does cryptocurrency have the potential to achieve digitizing money if you can use it wherever you want, especially when millennials will be part of the majority of merchant businesses and customers?
Well, I think Fahad, that's a great question. In fact, now with having this FinTech stack, which I think is a generic for all digital financial services, the question is, you could use the stack to say, well, what's so special about cryptocurrency then? In fact, which of these layers has Bitcoin solved, or at least solved better than the normal ones? And I would say, just on a quick, I hadn't really thought through it like that, but I would certainly invite you to look at that, and in fact do it for your domestic financial service providers. Who are the players that do best at each of these layers? So look at comparative advantage that way. But in terms of Bitcoin, I would say certainly one that is revolutionary is the digital identity, because in fact it's not linked at all to any form of legal ID. And it's basically using public key infrastructure. The private public key deals with the digital identity issue in a way very different to any bank. And then, of course, I think the other layer is the storage of value, where you're in control of that money. And so it's like cash. Where's the storage of value in cash? Well, it's your pocket. Anything in your pocket is your cash. The bills don't get inscribed with your name. So how do I know that this bill is yours? Well, simply because it's in your pocket or in your hand. So it's this decentralization of the storage of value that Bitcoin has tried to replicate in a different way. But I would say the biggest change is in real-time money transfers, because Bitcoin or cryptocurrency in theory represents, and I'm not saying that the practice is exactly like that yet, because it's still early days, but in theory it represents all of us being in our RTGS, all of us being in the real-time gross settlement system, as opposed to what we're used to is that our banks are members of the RTGS, but we as customers are not. So it's a tiered system. Whereas with Bitcoin, all of us have direct access to this highway directly. I don't need to employ a bank to put money on that highway. So Fahad, a great question, and I would encourage you to think about those. Go layer by layer and say, well, how has Bitcoin or cryptocurrency transformed or potentially promised to change each of these layers one by one?
Thanks, Ignacio.
Oh, sorry, let me add the other one, Bitcoin, of course, open access interfaces. And that is the essence of the notion of programmable money, where anybody can write a program on the money. So I can write a little program that, pay Fahad tomorrow if it's raining, and or if Mars is a certain distance from Venus. It's just conditions that you just write in code directly, and so that is an open access interface. Anybody can write these little, what are called smart contracts, and not just your bank.
Great, thanks Ignacio. And I can see that Jay Shree and also Griffin are on a similar thought to me. I was thinking about the regulator and their role in this. So Jay Shree is asking about eKYC. Is that a prerequisite for the FinTech stack to work effectively? Because in Vietnam, where he is, eKYC is not allowed by the regulator.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think if you're a regulator, I would go, again, I would use exactly this stack as a thought mechanism, but then I would ask two questions. One is, what, at each of these layers, what can I do to remove barriers? And that's the minimum that a regulator should do. And at the digital identity layer, having eKYC, I mean, it's not a prerequisite because the stack continues existing. You're just making life difficult. So as a regulator, if you don't have eKYC and you create headaches down at the bottom layers of the stack, don't be surprised that none of your financial institutions is succeeding at the top layers, because you're just making it too hard. It's just, the problem is too big. So they'll focus one layer at a time. And for the next year, they'll try to solve their KYC problem. So don't be surprised that resolution falls by the wayside, as participation, basics products, no tools, no open access interfaces, because they're spending all their time on the basics. So as a regulator, I think you want to go through each of these layers and say, first, what can I do to simplify the task of people trying to do this? Secondly, and I think it's one that regulators generally don't think about, is what can I do to promote it? Not just to eliminate barriers, but to actually promote it. For example, structured products, it's not obvious that that's a regulatory problem, because the regulator is not going to mandate certain products, or at least I hope they don't. So what can you do to encourage them? And maybe you, well, certainly maybe you can decide, well, there's not enough competition at the product level. Therefore, I need to really push on open access interfaces and APIs and so on. But equally, you might create a DFS lab. You might engage in dissemination of good products that exist in other countries to inspire your banks and so on. So I think regulators should get out of the mode of the job. My job is only to limit, but rather, how can I encourage progress in each of these layers, because all are important. And a regulator that thinks, oh, I'm only relevant in the bottom layers, I think is going to be disappointed in terms of the market outcomes. There's much more you can do to reach better market outcomes beyond just regulation.
And I think that's one of the real advantages of this FinTech Stack model, is it does give you the broader picture. It reminds you to keep looking at all the different layers, all the different things that need to come together, and not just just focusing on one bit, like exactly as you've been saying.
Yeah, just take any successful system. It doesn't get more successful than M-Pesa in Kenya. But then you look at, well, which of these layers they are excelling at, and you realize there's very few. That doesn't detract from the merit that they have. In fact, it has particular merit that they've succeeded by handling relatively few layers. And that's been the key to their success, that in fact, they could progress on a few layers, not on others, and it still worked. And when we find M-Pesa type platforms to be difficult to replicate in other countries, is that for whatever reason, in other countries, other layers are important too. And it's when you copy literally what's worked in Kenya and apply to other places that may not work. Whereas for a variety of market or regulatory reasons, it turns out that this layer is important for the customer. For example, when the alternatives to money payments, money transfer, is the bus system, which was the reality in Kenya. Before M-Pesa, you would go to the bus station to handle your money transfers back home. When the alternative is as bad as that, the trust layer is not that important, because the trust in the other system is even worse. But if the alternative is that there are, like in Latin America, quite extensively, a whole bunch of payment networks that exist for paying bills and so on, those have been running for a long time. Those are trusted. So your system needs to be even more trusted because it's new. And so the trust layer becomes more important. And if you don't do it because Kenya was not necessary, you're missing the point. So always look at the full stack
And I'm not saying that everything is equally important everywhere. It's the opposite. This is a framework for you to really figure out what's really important in my market, where are my competitors really strong, therefore, how can I play in at a different layer that really makes them want to play with me. So yeah, this is just the beginning. FinTech Stack for me, or the notion of a stack for me, is just the beginning for a whole range of strategic analyses.
So it's interesting. It's almost like be an expert at one small bit. Don't try and do the whole thing, otherwise you probably will fail.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the name that I affectionately apply to the standard DFS, what is now the standard model, is I call it the superhuman model. The superhero model. Can we find in my market? Oh, in my market, I love there to be an M-Pesa type thing. Who is the superhero who can push on all these fronts at the same time? And it's hard. You may not find any superhero who has that sort of power because they have much lower market share than Safaricom did in Kenya. They're less trusted. They're less well known, et cetera, et cetera. There's many reasons why a superhero might not emerge. But what if a superhero emerges? Then you have a different problem, which is too many of these layers are completely controlled by one player. So that's why regulatory policy should always attempt to simplify the market entry by making it so that you don't need to excel at all of them in order to be part of the market, which is simplifying a little bit the current model. Who wants to play superhero in my country? Don't be surprised no one does, and if someone does, then you have an even bigger problem. So that's why you should really have a competitive model that allows everybody to excel at a small part of it, which then creates lots of incentives for them to want to play with each other because they know they have big gaps. And the last thing that they want to do is to distract themselves from the layers that is really close to them. And I think in general, what's the layers that are missing are the top ones. Resolution, participation, structured products, standard tools, open access interfaces, those are largely lacking in most of our markets.
And Elizabeth's got a good question here about the APIs. There's a lot of resistance from a lot of banks on having this open access layer. What would you say are some of the unique propositions to banks to basically bring people and allow them to open up this layer?
Well, I would use two arguments. The first argument is the generally when people are not wanting to understand something is reframe, right? Don't hammer the same point over and over again because their incentives are not to understand it. So use the electricity example. So are you saying that that you should only be able to plug into your into the electric grid devices sold by the electricity company? That's ridiculous. Because let me tell you what the result would be if that was the policy. The electric company not only would want to supply you all the devices, and then don't be surprised that you don't have the thousands of pluggable devices. They will just have 10 because they would make the bulk of their money with those 10. So you wouldn't have the range of kettles and lawnmowers and so on. Why would they? They would just be one of each. So first, far fewer choices, which means a lot of unmet customer demands. And the other thing that would happen is that they would try to price discriminate, because electricity that is for lighting might be higher willingness to pay than electricity that's for mowing the lawn. So what they would do essentially is, well, we'll put 10 different plugs in your home. This one, this one is for the lawnmower. This one is for the toaster. This one is for etc. Because then they can charge the electrons at a different price. So that's what they would do. They would put 10 plugs and then they would sell you devices, one for each plug. And through that, they've creamed the market. That's what they would do. That's what banks are doing. And now with that, I'm not saying that they're bad people or anything like that. I mean, they're just responding to the incentives that are put in front of them. What would I tell them? Ultimately, when people are not willing to work with others, it's generally because they have an insecurity about where am I really good at? And so they need to come up with an answer to that. It's like working with partners is fantastic when you feel like your position with the customer is not shakeable because you really stand for something. Unfortunately, all the players who are focused on the bottom layers of the stack, which is about reliability and networks and agents and so on, they don't really mean anything in the eyes of the customer other than a utility. But what if you were known because you had the best store of value proposition, the best user interface, the best something? So yeah, I can understand. I mean, the more insecure banks feel about APIs, the more I'm going to think that the more insecure they feel about their own service.
That's really interesting, Ignacio. I think, you know, the idea of collaborating is a scary thing, but if you're, like you say, if you're very confident that people are going to want to come and collaborate with you and that you've got something unique to offer, it will definitely put you in a very different mindset in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look at the typical mobile money market. How do you want Airtel and Tigo and Safaricom and Vodacom and all these players to collaborate? They're doing fundamentally the same thing. They don't stand up for anything differently for others, except the possibly size. Size is the only thing that differentiates them. I'm bigger, therefore you should go with me. I have more agents. It's size that differentiates them. But of course, if you're fundamentally the same, or size is the only thing that differentiates you, your interest in working with these other partners is zero. But what if each of these players was good at something slightly different? Then you'd see how quickly they will want to create propositions the sum of all of them. And frankly, this is how the internet has developed, where someone is really good at devices, call it Apple. Another one is very good at connectivity, call it whatever. Another one is very good at antivirus software, call it McAfee. And each one is comfortable in what they do, and therefore have no aspiration to control the value chain end to end. Well, that was in the old days, with the centralization of power in Google and so on. Maybe this doesn't hold as much as it used to, but that's how it was.
And a sort of a related question to that comes from Chantel on interoperability. So she asks, how far do you think we are away for seeing more interoperable systems?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, as long as in the market, every player is a carbon copy of each other, with the only difference being size, it's just very difficult to imagine that can happen commercially. I have a little bit of a different view than the standard, shall we say, development organization view. I think interoperability should be mandated. Most people who are regulatory experts will say, "Oh, interoperability is very important, but it should be the market that does it. The regulator should be for it, but they shouldn't be mandating it." Well, I think that's a very slow path. So I do think that regulators should be mandating it, but they should do it in a way that limits people's choices as much as possible. For example, and if we're talking about back-end interoperability, right? So I can send money from one account to any other account in the country. You shouldn't mandate exactly how interoperability happens in all cases. All you need to do is say, well, here's this national switch. Everybody needs to connect to this. And so that becomes the way to exchange payments, switch payments by default. But hey, if two banks want to have a private switch, let them. So it's not like everything needs to go through this national switch. The national switch is the default option if nothing else is in place. So a small bank can then send money to an account of the big bank. But if there's two big banks who want to do it on their own way, that's fine. That's not a problem. So you should allow voluntary arrangements on top of this baseline mandatory level of interoperability. Unfortunately, when they regulators get into mandating interoperability, then they want the single solution that applies to everyone. No, you should only mandate the default option, the minimum interoperability, but then let people come up with other solutions if they feel like it's to their mutual advantage.
Great, and again, another role for the regulator to play in this process.
Yes.
We've got two questions here about digital identification down at the bottom, towards the bottom of the layer. One from Andre. In countries where digital ID is not made, what impact can this have on other layers? And Maxime is concerned with the integrity of the digital ID and trust and use of data?
Yeah, so if digital identity will exist, so the only question is who supplies it, right? So if the government is not supplying a national ID, that doesn't stop digital identity from existing, but then by definition, it's going to be private digital identities. And that's basically any time that your bank gives you a username and password. That becomes your digital identity. So it's not necessarily a problem from that point of view, because, well, the bank will. I mean, a digital identity at the end of the day is a private agreement between you and your bank of how I'm going to be identified. What do I need to show you, bank, for you to know that it's my money? And that's how it works in most places. Whether this, the government can then put in a KYC requirement and so on. But even if there was no KYC requirement, you could still have digital identity. But even the government just has no interest in digital identity, but then it would be private identity. And essentially every time you open an account, you would go through a different process with each bank because the identity from one account doesn't transfer over to another one. So you would have just a system of private identities, which, nothing wrong, except that you might then get to situations where you feel unprotected. Like, for example, if you forget what your username and password were, and then because there was no legal identity behind it, there's no way, no fallback for you to prove your identity. So that would be a practical problem that would arise. I must say, at a very personal level, I'm becoming very, very distrustful of national digital IDs. And that's simply because once the government knows it's easy for you to identify yourself, because there's these digital IDs that everybody has, and it just like one click away on your mobile phone and so on, I worry about governments then requiring it for everything. So for opening bank account, there might be reason to think that you need to be identified. But next time you want to buy a train ticket, it turns out that you need to be identified. And next time you want to buy a dishwasher, that you need to be identified. And you go, why? Well, simply because it's easy. So I do worry about national digital identity that is too available will become irresistible for the state to ask you to identify yourself with every step you take in the digital world. Because of course, that's law enforcement, and that's tax. That's creating more visibility on who's doing what, and potentially catching bad people because they travel on that train or whatever, and tax compliance and so on. So I do think as a society, we should not make it that easy for digital identity to be proven online for the government, because otherwise they'll be requesting it for everything. But anyway, that's just a personal opinion that I have. I know it's not the standard view nowadays, because I think our space is too dominated by economists who just look at efficiency and not by any other moral or ethical societal values. Was that provocative enough?
Thanks, Ignacio. I mean, I have to say, I kind of feel similarly, there is definitely the convenience of having one ID that you can use. But, when you need to keep producing that ID for daily activities that really, is it particularly relevant, then I would agree with you that it becomes concerning about what is being stored and collected about you without you even really necessarily knowing or 100% consenting to.
Let me just say one more thing. I don't think it's a coincidence that the two countries in the world, which in my view are most entrenched in democracy, that had most alive democratic values, and that's not to say that they're good in every other way possible. So please don't get irritated by countries I'm going to mention. But I think in terms of deep understanding of the sanctity of freedom of expression and all the other basic rights, political rights and human rights and so on, I think the two countries where that is most ingrained is the UK and the US. England and the United States. Obviously, that doesn't prevent them from having Trumps and so on, but it's not a coincidence that these are the two countries where there is no national ID. Because national ID and free and individual rights may not be as compatible as what a lot of people think. Anyway, that's just food for thought. This goes way beyond digital financial services.
And I guess it's also going to be discussed quite a lot in the China sections of leading markets for those people that are on that course. I know that that's one of the controversies and ethics that always comes up during those discussions. So
absolutely.
We'll leave those.
This is just a reference to that. That's taken the concern that I said further, because my concern was simply that every time you take a step online, you'll be requested to show your identity. In fact, I wanted to buy train tickets in Spain the other day. If I did it, and it was for 4 friends who are from abroad who were visiting, if I did it online, I had to list their full names and passport numbers and everything. I couldn't be bothered with that. I went to the train station, I bought the tickets, and they didn't require any IDs. The physical world, where it takes an employee actually looking at the IDs too much trouble, they skip that. On the digital, it's easy to put that in a web site that you just need to fill in the passport details. So like, why? So but that's the concern that I was saying. Simply that you'll need to show your digital ID every time you go to the bathroom, even. Exaggerating a little bit, obviously. But you're saying something else, which is on top, which is not only every time you do a transaction, but the information of those transactions will be aggregated and judgments will be passed on you in terms of whether you're a good citizen or a bad citizen and so on, which is the social credit score. So that's taking the concern to the next level, because I was talking about only the first layer on digital identity, and now you combine it with the third layer, which is on data aggregation. That combination is truly scary, at least for me.
And actually, Mark's question kind of links a bit more to that. He asked, can you give some examples or explain a little bit more about the aggregation and how that would work to learn about customers?
Well, this is the future of artificial intelligence, where Mark, I would really encourage you, haven't done so yet, is read Yuval Noah Harari. The Israeli historian, has written a few books, and he's very powerful in this stuff. But basically, we become the product that is being hacked. We, the human, are being hacked because the algorithm is collecting all this data, and the algorithm thinks that they can predict what we're going to be doing next before we do, and in fact can make us change our choices, because by the way, it presents information to us. So it's this idea that the data about you can be used for predictive power, to not only as a representation of what you've done in the past, but as a prediction of what you might do in the future, and secondly, to change your behaviors in the future, because we can, basically a Google News service that knows you will deliver to you the kind of information that it thinks you want, and over time, that's how you're going to think, because that's your source of information. So that's this malleability of the customer that all these tools or AI tools are trying to do, to, on the one hand, guess how you'll behave, and on the other hand, trying to influence how you behave. So that's what that is about. And of course, like all technologies, there's something good about that and something bad. Just like digital identity, there's something really good about it because you can do eKYC, and it all works very simply. For you to open a bank account, the government can request it for anything. So all tools, each of these layers in the FinTech stack can be used for good or for bad. That is another one that has a lot of potential for abuse, but on the other hand, credit always has been about accumulating information from people and using past information to make predictions about the future. So that's important. But in terms of financial services, that layer is particularly important for credit scoring, obviously, but it could also be prediction of the propensity. What is your propensity to buy this type of savings account versus that type of savings account? And then you could present that as a simplified way of marketing, right? Because now I'm just only presenting to you the right version of the savings product that is right for you, and not asking you to compare across these 30, 40 bottles of Coke that I had on the slide. That is just too complicated. So it has to do with credit scoring, propensity to buy or consume certain products, and eventually to manipulate you to drive you through certain outcomes, which, you know, if you're an economist, you might call it nudging. Some people might be a little bit more disturbed by that.
Thanks, Ignacio. I think, you know, it's all this lot of new technology, and we obviously also have our new AI course as well at DFI, that if people are particularly interested in this, we can recommend that they also go along to that one as well.
Yes, and the digital identity, which David runs as well.
Exactly. And at the end of our Q&A, which we're almost done, but just we've got a couple more questions to get through, we're also going to show you a little code. So if you do want to register for a second course with DFI, there's a discount code that you'll be able to access having gone through the webinar with us today. So it's our way of giving back. So we're just trying to
and then you'll be digital identified, and we'll collect all this information about you.
And then we'll guess what course you're going to go on next and what we're going to sell you next.
Exactly.
So we've got a couple of questions here, or a comment and a question coming in from Conde. So he agrees the open source and, you know, having APIs is a way to go. But he's asked, do you see these layers being standardized and sort of allow for solutions to interoperate?
Well, I mean, without standardization, it doesn't have any. There's no fun in it, and that's why, you know, the electric plug. The idea is it's a public standard that anybody can build a device to that plug. If it was a private thing and you need to talk to me, and only if I'm generous enough will I let you use that plug, it may help on the margin. But I think here the truly revolutionary thing is it's an open standard. This is how you link into a bank account of a customer with the customer's consent, obviously, and this is how you pass information between the customer and his bank. Now, in the same way as I perhaps sold you strongly on this idea, I would also urge you not to act on that too quickly, because with electricity, yeah, there's risks if you make the plug open the way it is now, because someone might put a wrong device and break the circuits. But that's why you have a little bit of regulation, which we call type approval. And in the case of electricity, just type approval is good enough. In other words, just meet these standards, take this test in the lab, and if you pass, then you're automatically approved to sell your toaster. In digital financial services, a little bit more complicated, because the application that you're using to interact with your bank, which will be a third-party application, is handling sensitive confidential information. For example, your bank PIN, and you definitely don't want a third party to be aware of your PIN. So this needs to be crafted very carefully, so that the third party that is giving you the user interface in no way is seeing your PIN, because otherwise you just compromise your own account. And that's how these things used to work. If those of you who are familiar with mint.com, which was a site that aggregated all of your different bank accounts, how that worked is that you told mint.com what your password was on different accounts. It logged in automatically on your behalf, pretending to be you, and then collected all information and put it all with nice graphs and so on. Okay, so that's the user interface layer, but done in a not sensible way, because it requires you giving your PIN to a third party. So the way these should be working, and that's how UPI and access to accounts in Europe are designed. If you want to have an app that plugs into this electricity equivalent, this API, there needs to be a little core, a nugget of your app, which is not controlled by you. And that might be controlled in the case of India by the MPCI, a particular public-private organization that manages the standard. And it's that application which is not under the control of the app provider, that applet, if you like, or sub-app, that part of the app which is not controlled by the provider, that requests the PIN to the bank and intermediates. And so you need all these apps to be able to plug in a safe way to handle all the sensitive information in the communication. So that is a high level of standard that is required to specify that, how exactly that works, who has access to this little applet that then you can embed within your own applications, et cetera, et cetera. So I really think if you're a country with low level of financial services. Really, I wouldn't make it my job in your country, Kombe in Zambia, to solve this problem for the world. I would say, let's let India and Europe kind of innovate on this, watch it very closely. And when you think that it's working well for them, then I would be in a hurry to bring it into Zambia. That's how I would handle it. So I would put in the category of space to watch very closely and only act once you feel like you've seen this work somewhere. I don't see why Zambia should be the world's innovator in this space. And by see that works, of course, I mean that it actually works in practice, not just that they have the standards published and it all looks very beautiful.
And I think we've also managed to answer Jay Shree's question, which was around, how can we make, these newer players that maybe are not, under typical regulations to protect customers, and this would be one way that you'd be able to do that, Ignacio.
Yeah, exactly. By having this applet that is a plug and play that anybody wanting to do the higher level services use, what you've done is actually insulated that top layer, which is the tools or the user interface or the product. You've insulated that from the digital identity because you're not handling that. You are given this little applet that solves all of that communication on identity and connection with the bank and so on. So really just focus on the user interface. So you're breaking the span of trust that you need to have with all these players. I just trust them to keep innovating and be providing me excellent user interface. And to the extent that they have customer service, that they answer my calls promptly and give me good answers. That is the extent of the trust. Once you start asking all these players to also handle my banking pins securely, okay, you've taken trust, you're asking way too much trust, and that's where you get back to the linking of the tight binding of all these layers in the FinTech stack in a way that, okay, we're back to the superhero model. Someone needs to be good at everything.
For sure.
So the core principle behind all of this is, of course, unbundling. Unbundle, 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 because unbundling is a way to simplify. You simplify products not by making them dumber, because customers' needs are sophisticated, but rather by unbundling. I'll do one little bit and I'm going to be good at it. Someone else will do another bit and I'm going to use them. Great.
Well, I think we've had a really good introduction and discussed lots of the different layers of the FinTech stack, so that's fantastic. We've had one request from Chantal if we could share that reading regarding AI. So Ignacio, I'll get that from you and we'll share it when we share the post with this recording as well.
Yes.
And I just want to say thank you very much, Ignacio, for taking the time today to chat with us and share with us. I've really enjoyed the session. Even though I've done leading markets before, it was really fantastic to go back and hear from you directly rather than just in the classroom about the model, and for me to understand it even more than I did probably from last time. So thank you very much.
Great, appreciate it. And anybody wants to follow up with any thought, observation, question, any suggestion on how to improve my stack, which again, I insist there's only one way to do it. You could do it many other ways, and feel free to do your own version. There's nothing right or wrong about mine. But if you want to share anything with me on this or a question or whatever, just email me, ignacio@digitalfrontiersinstitute.com, so .org.
Great, and I'm just going to share my screen. This is our way of saying thank you to everybody that joined us today. If you do want to sign up for another course with DFI, please feel free to use the discount code that's on the screen in front of you when you next sign up. And we really do hope that this webinar has encouraged you maybe to take the Leading Markets course or Digital ID or the AI course or any other course with us in the future. So thank you very much for taking the hour to share with us today, and we hope to see you all at the next webinar. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Ignacio.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye, everyone.